The architect of the impossible, a vessel of wood and faith partai. The order and the strength dimensions were not suggestions, they were. Blueprint issued from the highest authority in existence. 137 meters long, 23 meters wide. 3 full stories, the voice of God. Direct and supernaturally specific. Cut through the silence of a corrupt world. It left no room for negotiation, no space for a doubt. The command was simple yet terrifying in its scope. Build yourself an ark. At that moment, one of the greatest in feats ever undertaken by human hands began. We often read the biblical text and see only the finished product, a boat floating on water. But to transform the divine order into wood, beam, and structure, Noah had to face challenges that would break a lesser man. He was not just a prophet. He had to become a master builder, an engineer of the impossible in a world that had never say. And a ship of this magnitude, it all began with what many ignore, the terrain. You cannot simply drop a structure 137 meters longer than a modern football field just anywhere. It requires a foundation of immense stability. It needs ample space, far from dangerous slopes that could cause the vessel to slide prematurely, yet near enough to the cypress forests that would provide the raw material. Imagine Noah in those early days, walking across the landscape, his eyes scanning the horizon not with a spiritual gaze, but with the sharp discernment of a surveyor. He analyzed the soil, testing its firmness under his sandals. He gauged the density of the nearby forests. He calculated the logistics of transport without machines, without cranes, without maps. He had no pressed ends to follow, only practical wisdom and a burning faith. When he finally found the ideal location, a plateau firm enough to bear thousands of tons of timber, the first stage of work began. It was anything but glorious. There was no fanfare, only the grueling, back-breaking labor of preparation. Large stones had to be levered out of the earth. Deep, stubborn roots of ancient trees had to be uprooted. Every meter of that 137-meter footprint had to be leveled and compacted. The ground needed to be as hard as stone to support the keel that would soon be laid. But the preful world offered a unique challenge. The Bible explains in Genesis 2:6 that a mist rose from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. This implies a constant pavosi. The moisture rising from below, the soil was naturally damp, and damp soil turns to mud under pressure. Tools sink, footing is lost. Wood absorbs water and rots before it is even used to combat this. Noah likely had to engineer a drainage system before laying a single beam. We can picture him digging small channels round the perimeter of the construction site, creating diversions to guide the rising moisture away from the workspace. It wasn't rain falling from the sky that concerned him yet. It was the earth itself sweating order. While he dug in the mud, sweat dripping from his brow, people passed by. They watched this old man, preparing a gigantic plot of land for a structure that made no sense. Some laughed, pointing fingers. Others whispered in hushed tones about his sonnet. Why prepare a foundation for a building with no purpose? Noah didn't answer. He couldn't explain the logic of a flood to a world that had never seen rain. He didn't build according to human logic. He built according to divine instruction. Part 2. The forest and the keel. When the ground was finally firm, flat, and dry enough, the next mountain of difficulty rose, the wood. The command was specific. Make the ark of cypress wood. These were not small saplings. Cypress trees of the ancient world were titans, enormous, sturdy, and heavy. They were the only material capable of withstanding the stresses of the coming cataclysm. Felling such a tree with the rudimentary tools of the time, bronze, or perhaps iron axes, required immense strength and patience. It was a writ. Emek Exhausting discipline, blow after blow, hour after hour, until the great cracking sound echoed through the forest and the giant crashed to the earth. But felling one tree was nothing. Noah needed hundreds. He and his sons worked tirelessly, transforming the forest into a shipyard. Then came the transport. How do you move a multi-ton log kilometers across an even terrain without engines or hydraulics? No likely used the timeless solution of ancient engineers. Wooden rollers, smaller. Round trunks were placed beneath the massive cypress logs, with ropes made of twisted fibers and long wooden levers. Noah and his sons pulled, slowly, painfully, moving tons of wood a few meters at a time. As the log advanced, the rollers from the rear had to be carried to the front. It was slow, tiring, and risky work. One slip could crush a limb, but every log transported was an act of worship, another step in obeying the voice that had spoken to him. For he who has received instruction from God does not work by what he sees, but by what he believes. As the mountain of timber grew on the construction site, the time came to lay the backbone of the vessel, the keel. Any builder knew that a structure of this size required a central spine of immense strength to support the ribs, the hull, the three decks, and the cargo. But here lay a physical impossibility. No tree grew 137 meters tall. This meant Noah had to engineer a composite beam. He had to join several giant trunks end to end to create a continuous, straight, and solid line. This task demanded the highest level of joinery technique, using male and female scarf joints methods known to the most ancient civilizations. He fitted the massive logs together to secure them. He drove stakes and pegs of hardwood through the joints, locking them in place. These points of union had to be strong enough to hold the entire ship together when the earth itself would lead a bridge. Apart. With the keel laid, the ribs began to rise. These were the arched beams that would give the ark its shape. They had to be fitted precisely into the keel. Noah and his sons carved joints, allowing the ribs to naturally tilt and arch upwards. Imagine the scene. Enormous curved beams being hoisted into the air by frames, pulleys, and sheer human muscle. Ropes stretched taut, groaning under the weight. Noah, acting as the foreman, checking the angles with a plumb line, a simple stone on a string, ensuring vertical perfection. If a rib was tilted, even a fraction, the structural integrity of the whole vessel would be compromised. Slowly, the skeleton of the ark emerged. It rose from the earth like the rib cage of a leviathan, where there had never been a sea. A structure the size of a modern ocean liner stood, built by hand, defying the landscape around it. Part 3. The seal and the interior. A beautiful structure is useless if it sinks. God's instruction was clear. You shall cover the ark inside and out with bitumen. This detail was profound. Bitumen is sticky, black resin derived from the earth, was the waterproofing agent of the ancient world. But it wasn't as simple as painting. It had to be boiled, thickened, and applied while scalding hot. Noah and his sons became workers in pitch. They spent days, perhaps weeks, veering every crack, every joint, every microscopic crevice. They applied it to the outside to repel the coming waters, and to the inside to protect the wood from the rot of animal waste and humidity. It was a messy, hot, and suffocating job. But they knew that any flaw, any skipped inch, could mean death. When the pitch hardened, it formed a tough, impermeable shell. The ark was no longer just a wooden cage. It was an airtight capsule. Now, the focus turned inward. The Bible reveals a crucial detail. You shall make compartments in the ark, The Hebrew word kinning and literally me, and nests or small cells. This wasn't an open warehouse where animals would roam free. It was a highly organized facility. Noah had to become a logistical genius. He had 3 floors to work. Logic dictates a specific arrangement to maintain the vessel's center of gravity. The bottom floor, deep in the hole, would house the heaviest animals, elephants, hippos, rhinos. Their weight would act as ballast, keeping the ship stable against the violent waves. The middle floor would house medium-sized animals, lions, bears, cattle. The upper floor, closest to the ventilation and light, would house the birds and smaller creatures. He built internal walls, simple but strong, creating a grid of cages and stalls. These walls served a dual purpose. They separated predator from prey to prevent chaos, and they acted as structural bracing for the whole. Every piece of wood added weight, so Noah had to calculate carefully. Then there was the issue of air. You shall make an opening a cubit from above. This suggests a long, continuous window running along the top of the structure, under the overhang of the roof. But how do you ventilate the lower decks? No likely constructed internal air shafts or ducts, utilizing the natural convection of heat rising from the animals to pull fresh air down from the top. Without this, the build-up of methane and carbon dioxide from thousands of animals would have turned the ark into a gas chamber. And food, a year's worth of supplies for thousands of creatures. You shall take food for yourself and for them. This wasn't just tossing a few sacks of grain on board. It required silos for grain, racks for hay, sealed jars for dried fruits and roots, and cisterns for fresh water. Entire sections of the ark were dedicated solely to warehousing. The logistics of waste disposal were also critical. Sloped floors and drainage channels were likely employed to allow gravity to aid in cleaning the stalls. Part 4. The door and the Arivalas. The internal city was completed. The work reached its most critical structural point, the door, and put a door in its side. Genesis 6:16. It wasn't a standard door. It was a massive opening in the side of the hole, large enough to admit elephants and giraffes. Yet it had to be sealed tight enough to withstand the pressure of the deep. It was the single biggest structural vulnerability. To prevent the hole from buckling round this hole, Noah reinforced the frame with thick beams and diagonal bracing. He couldn't use massive metal ledge hinges like we do today. Instead, he likely fashioned a vertical pivot system, a reinforced wooden shaft that allowed the massive gate to rotate. This door was symbolic. It was the only way in. There was no back entrance, no window to climb through. Finally, the construction ceased. The hammers fell silent. Noah walked through the belly of the beast he had built. He tested the beams, checked the hardened pitch, inspected the cages, and listened to the settling of the wood. It creaked and groaned, alive and ready. He knew every inch of it. He knew the sweat and blood poured into every joint. Then, the supernatural took over. The Bible is explicit. The animals came to Noah. He didn't have to hunt them. He didn't herd them. It was as if an invisible frequency was calling them from the edge of the forest. They emerged, pairs of lions walking with a strange calm, birds descending from the sky in spiraling clouds, reptiles slithering with purpose. It was an orchestrated procession. They didn't fight. They didn't panic. Instincts of predator and prey were suspended. It was the divine seal on Noah's work, a miracle unfolding before the eyes of his family. They marched up the ramp and into the darkness of the ark. Each species found its kinnigan, its nest. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, followed 8 humans and a remnant of creation. Then came the moment of finality, and the Lord shut the door. Genesis 7:16. Noah didn't close it. It was too heavy. Perhaps, or simp. Light too significant. God sealed them in. The connection between the outside world and the sanctuary was severed. Part 5. The diligent side. A heavy silence fell. Outside, the world continued oblivion, as neighbors likely mocked the closed door, tapping on the wood, jeering at the family locked inside a coffin on dry land. But in the 600th year of Noah's life, the waiting ended. The Bible describes the cataclysm with terrifying precision. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Genesis 7:11. This wasn't just rain. The earth's crust fractured, superheated subterranean waters exploded to the surface with the force of 1,000 volcanoes. Earthquakes rippled through the bedrock. Inside the ark, Noah felt the massive structure, shudder not from wind, but from the ground, shaking beneath the keel. Then, the sky tore open. The first rain in history fell. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a deluge, a solid sheet of water. The noise on the roof must have been deafening a roar, like a continuous train. Thunder shook the ribs of the ship. Outside, panic replaced mockery. The water rose with terrifying speed. People ran for the hills, pounding on the sealed door of the ark. But it was too late. The door was shut by a hand that would not open it again until judgment was complete. The water rose and rose and rose. Finally, the massive hole groaned. The friction with the ground broke. For the first time, the ark lifted. It floated. The sensation for those inside must have been nauseating and awe-inspiring. The flue shifted beneath their feet. The vessel, built on faith, was now holding them up over the grave of the world. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. Genesis 7:19. Mountains disappeared. Cities were crushed. The ark drifted over a planet that was being erased. Inside, it was a self-contained world. Outside, death was absolute. Part 6. The long wait. And the ravenous rain stopped after 40 days. But the ordeal was far from over. The waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. The ark drifted on a boundless ocean. Inside, the routine was grueling, feeding thousands of animals, hauling water, cleaning waste in the dim light of oil lamps. The air was thick with the smell of animals and damp wood, but they were alive. Noah monitored vessel. He checked for leaks, reinforced bracing as the ship was battered by waves, and prayed. He waited. Then, the text says simply, and God remembered Noah. Genesis 8:1. A wind passed over the earth. The waters began to recede. The turbulence lessened. One day, a grinding sound echoed through the hole. The ark shuddered and came to a stop. It had rested on the mountain, so if a rod. Noah waited. He opened the upper window the first fresh air in months. The light was blinding, but was the earth ready? He couldn't see the ground below the mountain peaks. He needed data. He sent out a raven. The black bird flew back and forth, feeding on floating carrion, finding no place to land. The world was still a tomb. He waited 7 days and sent a dove. The dove returned, exhausted. No perch. The water was still. To hide. He waited another 7 days. He released the dove again. This time, as evening fell, the flutter of wings was heard at the window. The dove had returned, and in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Greenery, life. The trees were emerging. Hope was photosynthesizing again. He waited another 7 days and released the dove at the time. It did not return. It had found a home. The earth was habitable. Part 7. The altar and the covenant come out of the ark. Genesis 8:16. The command came more than a year after they had entered. Noah pushed open the covering. The door, sealed by God, was now open. They stepped out. The sensation of solid ground, not wood, but rock and dirt must have been overwhelming. The air was crisp and clean, washed by the greatest storm in history. The silence was profound. There were no cities humming, no voices in the distance, just the wind and the mountain. The animals streamed out, a river of life flowing down the slopes. Availot to repopulate the wild. Noah's first act was not to build a house, or a farm, or a fence. It was to build an altar there, amidst the mud and rocks of a new world. He offered a sacrifice to the Lord. He acknowledged that their survival was not due to his engineering skill or the strength of the cypress wood, but due to the grace of God. The smoke rose, and the Bible says God smelled the soothing aroma. He made a promise. Never again will I destroy all life with water. And then he painted the sky, a bow of light. The spectrum of colors arching over the devastation there. Rainbow. It was a signature, a treaty written in light. It was an eternal covenant, reminding humanity that even in judgment, God preserves the remnant, and he sustains life. The ark lay emptying on the mountain, its purpose fulfilled. It had been a vessel of wood and pitch, but ultimately it was a vessel of obedience from that wooden womb. The nations of the earth were born again. The story of redemption continued, flowing from the family of Noah down through the ages. Noah's work was done. He had built the impossible. Because he believed the incredible, the ark remained on the mountain, a silent testament that when the world drowns in chaos, God always provides a way for those who trust in his voice.